Hi, and welcome everybody. We're pleased to get started now. My name's Radha Rajkotia. I'm the Chief Research and Policy Officer at Innovations for Poverty Action, based out of our Washington, DC office. We're very pleased to welcome you to today's webinar on supporting women's work and skills development in the time of COVID, which we're hosting in partnership with our good friends and partners at A2I. As well as many others who you can see here on this first slide. Shannon, next slide, please. Just in terms of the session and some basic housekeeping tips, which hopefully at this stage of the pandemic we should all be familiar with. If everyone can just remain on mute and remember to stay on mute when you're not speaking. We will be taking, for all of the participants, we will be taking questions throughout. So feel free to use both the Q&A chat as well as the raise your hand feature, which we'll be monitoring and we'll be, we would love to hear from you directly. Please do, when we do call on you to speak, please do introduce yourselves and your affiliation, your organizational affiliation. And you're very welcome to keep the video on. We've suggested that those who are speaking certainly keep their video on, and others are welcome to choose either way. And just lastly, we will be recording this meeting, so just remember that that if you're on video, just remember that you're on video, and that there will be a meeting that will be shared with all of the registered participants after the session. Okay, so today we're very excited to have this session today. I think that it goes without saying that we are aware of the impacts, the range of impacts really that that COVID has had on so many, and in particular on women and young women in relation to their work, their engagement in the labor force, in educational and training opportunities, as well as from a psychosocial perspective in terms of their own coping and their abilities to think about their futures as well. So now what we're keen to do today is share with you some of the findings that we have from recent research that has been conducted by our partners and panelists on the call. But also really use this as a productive, generative session to really think about what the questions are that need to be answered, and whether some of the research designs that are being presented, whether those are fully answering the key questions that we have in relation to designing appropriate COVID responses. So what we will be doing in terms of broad goals for today is sharing some of the data that has been gathered directly with many of you who we hope who will find it useful, but really creating a space for us to talk about those findings themselves, and also as we're thinking about planned research, whether there are changes or things that we need to be focusing on more or less as those designs are presented in terms of thinking about future policy or programmatic designs. Get on the next page. So briefly in terms of the agenda, so I will keep my remarks short and then hand over to Asad Bhai, who will from A2I, who will speak a little bit about A2I's own role and approach here in relation to this topic. We'll have a series of presentations from our researchers who are on the line, and then we will go to some policy reflections from Wahid Bhai, and then an open Q&A before we close. So it's a bit of a jam-packed session, but we hope that you'll find it productive. So just in short, I wanted to just give, for those of you who aren't familiar with Innovations for Poverty Action, IPA, I wanted to give a quick intro of just who we are and what we do. So we are a research and policy organization, and we really focus on creating and identifying research, creating data and evidence for relevant research priorities. So we identify questions that are of policy or programmatic relevance. We design and help innovate on solutions with partners, and then think about how to evaluate those. And as we continue to build that evidence, we think about how, through our ongoing relationships with partners, we think about how that evidence can be incorporated. This slide makes it seem like a very linear approach, and we know that in reality that's not the case. There's a lot more iteration that happens throughout. But it's really at the core of what we're trying to do. And so today's meetings are an important part of that. We operate in 22 country offices across the globe, and we have subject matter expertise in a number of different areas, from agriculture to financial inclusion, social protection, and peace and recovery. We work with a number of both research partners, many of whom are on, well, not many of whom, but some of whom are on the call today, and then also implementing partners who are actually going to be the ones responsible for telling us what they think they need, but then also being able to put that evidence to use. So to date, we've conducted over 850 evaluations in over 51 countries, and we've been around for about 17 years. In Bangladesh, we've been operational since about 2011, and we've conducted over 27 evaluations. You can see from this slide, the main areas of focus have been around SME development, worker productivity, and health and sanitation. We've done this through very close partnerships, A2I being a core partner through that time. And then we've also been working with a number of different partners who have helped us ground those, both the evidence and the idea generation in ongoing practice. More recently, our focus on COVID has really ramped up, both in Bangladesh and globally. And we've been engaging in very large scale, both evaluations and then policy uptake efforts around mask usage, and then also issues related to household impacts and children's education. So I'll do a quick introduction of our panelists. So we're very pleased to welcome Asad Bhai Atiq Chowdhury, who is from Skills to Succeed, Ashley Popel from the University of Oxford, Atanu Rabbani, who's from the University of Dhaka, Jerusalem from also from Skills to Succeed, Save the Children, Chris Woodruff from the University of Oxford, and Nathan Fiala from the University of Connecticut. And our policy remarks will be given by Wahid Bhai also from A2I. So with that, I think we can get started, and I'll hand it over to Asad Bhai for some quick intro remarks. Thanks.
Thank you, Radha. So let me share the presentation. Can you share the screen?
Yes, we can see that.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. So I would like to begin my presentation by quoting our Honorable Prime Minister's Prime Minister. Skill manpower is the main tool to carry out the development activities, meaning there is practically no other alternative of skilling if we want to be a developed country by 2041. We can see in the picture here that a person is trying to act as a bridge to fulfill the gap between industries and skills and development agencies. Actually, if you use the youth context of Bangladesh, actually is growing 2.2%. Actually, 2 million youth are coming in the labor force every year, and our total youth population are 42 million, according to our BBS. And youth unemployment rate is 12%, which is 5.2 million. and youth in need, that means not in education, employment, and training, is actually 40%. And total labor force in unemployment is 19%. That's actually alarming. That means 15 million actually. So actually, from the future about lab of A2I, we follow a methodology. We call it 6D methodology. That means 6D means for starting any training, any skills, we take the demand from the industry at first. Then we do demand supply matching by our data platform. We call it NISE, National Intelligence for Skills, Education, Employment, Entrepreneurship, NISE. So demand supply matching through NISE. Then based on the demand of the industry, we develop a curriculum by our specific boards, Bangladesh Technician boards, and then develop market-driven skills. And for many cases, you will see that many of the organizations, that their first job is to develop skills and last job is to develop skills, but we focus on skills in the fourth stage, not in the first stage. And in the last day of the training, actually we distribute certificate and appointment letter through job fair. And we arrange job fair with different industries. And through the process, actually, the youth get jobs in different industries, and they are involved in recent employment. So according to our NSDP, actually 30% should be female in each of the skills development process. Actually, FOLAB believes that only skills development won't be enough for creating entrepreneurship, and an ecosystem needs to be designed that evolves around 6 factors. That means capitalizing them through skilling, establishing market linkage support, policy support, arranging financial support, having a positive mindset on entrepreneurship, and getting business advice support regularly. So actually, we support different agencies of the government in different ministries, also private sectors, on this methodology. If you see the challenges of CMSME, we call it CMSME, Cottage, Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises in Bangladesh, you will see 18.7% entrepreneurs have lack of training, lack of skilled manpower in 32.8%, and hassle with bank loans, it faces by 34%, and 50% of the entrepreneurs have a capital shortage, and 55% don't know how to market products, and a large number of them are women actually. Actually, in 2016, we have introduced an apprenticeship program in CMSMEs, focusing mainly women actually, and 70% of them are women. And in 2016, we piloted actually a CMSME-based apprenticeship program in 30 upazilas with 600 plus CMSMEs, where 1,200 unemployed youths joined as apprentices. And in 2017 and 18, it has been expanded by the Department of Social Services with the advisory support of A2I, and now it's going on in 130 plus sub-districts. In 2019, again, Department of Social Services expanded it to again 200 plus sub-districts with a special focus on women. And in 2020, we have not started any intervention due to COVID, but this year we are piloting apprenticeship program with 800 CMSMEs in 40 sub-districts with the support of UNICEF and Generation Unlimited. And actually, regarding CMSMEs, we have 4 focus, actually: access to skills, access to finance, access to services, and access to market. And if we see the status of CMSME stakeholders in Bangladesh, you know, there are both public and private organizations like SM Foundation, Department of Cooperatives, Small and Cottage Industry Corporation, Bangladesh Investment Development Authority, BIDA, NASIF, the Department of Women Affairs, Department of Youth Development, Department of Social Services, BMAT, local administration, and local NGOs, and they have a special focus on developing entrepreneurship skills. We have also a special program in a district level. It's run by Cabinet Division and A2I jointly, and we call it Unemployment Free District. So actually the objective of this program is to create employment for the youth in district level and to make the district unemployment free. And actually under this initiative, we are arranging matchmaking workshops in district level involving industries, training centers and youth. And each of the districts are planning and doing a action plan for next 1 year based on the consultations, and women is a special focus out of them. So this is actually a study done by A2I in 2019. We are sharing with you. Actually, we did a study on fourth industrial revolution in 2019, and we have seen that. And the study actually conducted in 5 areas: ready-made garments and textile, furniture, agro-food, leather, and tourism sector. And we found that actually, actually 55 lakh, that means 5.5 million jobs will be lost in different sectors by 2041. And many of the existing occupations are not valid due to 4IR. And there are a lot of emerging occupations like 3D printer operator, workers with skills on automation, RTA designer, food technologists, industrial robotics control, CAD/CAM training, digital marketing. And if we see our ready-made garment sector, we'll see that almost already 400,000 women have lost their jobs due to 4IR. We also did a study last year focusing on 16 economic sectors of Bangladesh, and we have seen that in 11 sectors like SME and informal sector, transportation, construction, furniture, ready-made garments, leather goods, tourism, light engineering, and migrant workers, ceramic and real estate. In these 11 sectors, already 20 million jobs are lost due to COVID in 2020. And at the same time, there are a lot of new jobs are emerged in different sectors like agri-food sector, healthcare sector, ICT and e-commerce, pharmaceuticals, and creative media. So we have a data platform. We call it National Intelligence for Skills, Education, Employment, Entrepreneurship, and NISE. So actually, the background of this platform, actually, you know, there is no single platform available for skill seekers in Bangladesh. Multiple job portals with no linkage with each other, no central youth database, no platform for entrepreneurs, and huge gap between supply and demand side. Also, inability to monitor and mentor online, inability of single platform SDG 8, and lack of right information among the rural youth. And the key modules are actually real-time data sharing between the supply and demand side, new job forecasting, entrepreneurship, apprenticeship, self-assessment, skill and safe migration, a central youth database, returning migrant database, career guidance and mentorship, course information, and monitoring and mentorship for 23 ministries. So actually, through this NISE platform, currently, most of the government agencies, also private sectors, are coordinating, monitoring, and mentoring their activities. So we are actually, from what A2I, we have 3 specific strategic recommendations and that need to be followed regarding women skills. Actually, according to our, in order to prepare ourselves to counter the job threats due to COVID-19 and 4IR, some robust strategies need to be designed where women employment needs to get a special attention. The government is also putting emphasis on this in policy. According to National Skill Development Policy 2011, endorsed by the Honorable Prime Minister, at least 30% of the participants should be female in any kind of skills training. Secondly, 10 million people lost their jobs in the SME sector due to COVID-19, and a major portion of them are women. These alarming statistic calls for introducing women-friendly initiatives in SME and informal sector. Due to 4IR, I have mentioned earlier, around 400,000 women already lost their jobs in the ready-made garments and textile sector. So we need to take a reskilling and upskilling program focusing on women. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Asadla. It's great to see both what the government's already been doing and also adaptations with COVID. So with that, I'll hand over to Ashley now, who's going to be presenting on gender dynamics in search frictions and online job matching.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Good morning, afternoon, everyone. My name is Ashley Popel, and I'm a PhD student in economics at the University of Oxford. And I'll be presenting basically some preliminary results from qualitative interviews and a research design for a project that I'll be doing over the summer, for which I would love some feedback on an online job matching platform in Bangladesh. So as the previous presentation acutely noted, COVID-19 has disproportionately affected women and young people, but there's an opportunity for the recent proliferation in job matching technologies to overcome some of the barriers that are being introduced, especially around mobility restrictions and the fact that there's a rapidly changing economy and labor market. But the focus to date has been predominantly on high-skilled jobs. So for example, bdjobs.com. But that being said, there's been some new technologies that have been developed for more lower skilled jobs. In particular, in Bangladesh, there's a very promising platform called Cormo, which targets lower tier university students in the service sector. So the kinds of jobs that are being advertised are shop sales assistant, delivery riders, call center agents, brand promoters. And even during the pandemic, approximately 3,000 job seekers were using the app, new job seekers were using the app weekly, and firms were posting about 13,000 vacancies. But one question that remains is, so to what extent are these, how are job seekers using these platforms? But what would also be the best way to design these technologies? So it remains a bit of an open question as to how to best design them. And in particular, in the technology world, there's this drive towards a frictionless product. So can we remove all application costs that exist in the application? So can we make it as easy as possible for job seekers to apply? So all they have to do is search for a job and then click apply if they're interested. On the one hand, this could mean that more job seekers are able to apply for jobs, and then firms can have a huge variety of applications through which to sift. But there could be a negative effect from this, which is that as a result of the ease with which people can apply for jobs online, as opposed to what would happen, say, offline traditionally, there is now this new phenomenon of like high volumes of ill-targeted online applications. And it becomes very difficult to form a good match. So it's very hard to actually match a good worker to a job. And as a result, firms tend to rely on proxies such as universities or previous job experience, which can be inequality enhancing. And this tends to discriminate against women or other marginalized job seekers. So what I'm going to be discussing today is potentially an option to introduce what I call positive frictions. So can we better improve the match between job seekers and firms by asking job seekers to spend a little bit more time on an application and see whether they've actually paid attention to the job description. And in doing so, we can try reduce the number of online applications, but then this actually makes it better for both the job seekers and the firms in the long run. So to motivate this, I just want to provide some 5 lessons from a qualitative study I did last year, January 2020 last year. So I interviewed about 50 job seekers and 20 employers who were using the platform. And what we was observing is that employers were reporting that they were actually receiving too many applications. And so they were demanding more holistic filtering. In particular, they noted that education qualifications were not great proxies of job fit. So they wanted something more than just which university did someone go to, what past work experience did they come from, but they wanted something more related to their preferences and motivation. Like, to what extent are job seekers committed to the jobs that they're applying for? But as a result of there being too many applications and not very great filters, employers were relying heavily on interviews. But the problem was that they were observing that once people were applying through this job application, this job app, there was a very low interview attendance rate of approximately 10 to 20%. And even those who accepted, who were offered a job, there was a high rejection rates and high turnover rates. So there's something going on here in terms of how the technology is being designed that then affects how, to what extent is there a good outcome in terms of how job seekers are being matched to firms. And two other observations to note is that job seekers had enormous preference, like variation in what they preferred in terms of jobs. So the same job seeker with the same education and the same experience profile would have very different preferences as to which jobs they would like to apply for, and that they had misaligned expectations about what they could earn in their first job. So they were often disillusioned once they applied for a job and noted that they had that the wages being offered were much lower than what they were expecting. So this is all to say that there's two research questions that I'm hoping to answer. Don't have any answers yet, but I will be collecting the data over the next 3-4 months. So the first question is, how are job seekers using job matching technologies, in particular this one, to find jobs in the service sector? And what is this whole process from applying to the point at which they're actually accepting the job? Secondly, can positive frictions, or the way in which we design the platform, actually improve job outcomes for job seekers, especially for women and marginalized job seekers? And I'll explain this in a bit more detail in a bit. So in terms of the first question, this is just a kind of a process through which I'm hoping to just shed light by collecting data at each of these points in time. How are job seekers actually using this technology to find jobs in the service sector? So we have a lot of data from the point at which the job seeker chooses to use a Korma app to search for jobs, but actually we know very little about what happens thereafter. So we know which applicants are being shortlisted and invited to interviews, but we don't know much about which applicants are being offered a job, which ones are taking up the job, and what are the longer term outcomes of interest, such as job satisfaction, wages, and retention. And more importantly, how do these outcomes differ by gender? So there's some suggestive evidence that women are already applying for different types of jobs to men, but it's not clear whether there's any other forms of discrimination or just different experiences at these different points in time. So the second question I want to ask is how to best design these job matching technologies. And in particular, I'm really interested in this role of the positive friction. So as I mentioned before, there's this drive to try to remove all application costs as much as possible, so that all that a job seeker has to do is click the apply button when submitting an application. But as we saw, this resulted in too many applications. So what I'm hoping to do here is, this is just the process by which a job seeker applies on the app. So they download the app, they consent to be part of the study, they search for a job, and then they read the job description. And then I'm going to introduce a few questions that ask them about what the job description that they've just read, and see whether or not applicants actually choose to apply for the job or not. And the idea is that this positive friction can proxy for motivation, in the sense that job seekers who are more motivated or seem to be a better fit for a job would be more likely to have read the job description and find it easier to answer these questions. So the hope is that these will these positive frictions can serve as a better indicator of motivation and job fit that go beyond just the usual proxies that are being used, such as whether they're part of, what university have they gone to, or what past experience they've had, which tend to disproportionately discriminate against marginalized job seekers who don't usually have these proxies. And I'll be evaluating the effect of this through a randomized control trial. This is just to say that these 4 different arms, so job seekers will be randomized into these 4 arms. And what this will allow me to say is, to what extent is this positive friction having a positive role, and how does it compare to some of the other more typical tests that are being run on these kinds of platforms, such as like a competency test. And I'm going to wrap up very shortly, just to say that I'm interested in short, medium, and long-term outcomes, which will be collected both via the platform and via surveys with job seekers and firms. And what I'm hoping to do with this project is to speak to the broader question of how are job seekers actually using the job matching technology. This is just descriptively who are using it, what are the constraints that people are facing, how does this vary for women and other dimensions proxying for exclusion, such as more rural job seekers, and also how to best design job matching technologies in the future. And in particular, leveraging on behavioral tools that help to broaden the information that can be used to match job seekers employers. So yeah, very keen to hear some feedback if anyone has on this research design before it's implemented in practice. And thank you very much for organizing this wonderful webinar.
Thank you, Ashley. That's great to hear. So please do, as people are listening, if it's generating ideas, then please do share them in the chat, and we'll also make sure that we have space during the Q&A for any further discussion. We'll hand over now to Atik Chowdhury and Jerusalem Tessema, sorry, for their presentation on gender analysis from the Skills to Succeed program.
Great, thank you so much, Radha. Good morning, good evening, everyone. Thank you again to IPA for extending an invitation for us to come and present. My colleague Atik and I will briefly talk about the gender analysis that we conducted in Bangladesh as part of the Skills to Succeed program. Before we get started, we'll just briefly introduce ourselves.
Hi, good morning and good afternoon to everyone. This is Atik Chowdhury, working in Save the Children as a project director of the Skill to Succeed project.
Great, and my name is Jerusalem Tessema. I'm a monitoring, evaluation, and research senior specialist for a global youth employment program called Skills to Succeed. So what is Skills to Succeed? We are a global program funded primarily by Accenture, and we've been working in various countries since 2011. The goal of the Skills to Succeed program is to work with youth and provide them with training and job linkage support so they can find decent work or start their own businesses. Since we've been around, we've worked in several countries, including Bangladesh, Indonesia, and Vietnam.
Now I'm going to talk about the Skill to Succeed project in Bangladesh. This Skill to Succeed project in Bangladesh aims to give a decent employment to the youth who are vulnerable, dropped out from the education with minimum grade 8 competency and living in Dhaka urban slum areas. So the two steps, one is the 60 hours of employability skills training, then the youth enters into 180 hours of vocational training and job linkage support. In the employability skills training, we provide the skills that is required as a prerequisite to enter into a job market. That is focusing on increasing positive self-concept, the social and communication skills, higher order thinking skills, job search skills, as well as occupational health and safety. Then the youth enters into the 180 hours vocational training, focusing on ICT occupation. And every youth have taken out of 4 trades or one single choice, one single trade based on their interest and the scope of demand in the market. These are web design, graphics design, accounting and finance, and customer care. Now the job linkage support starts in this project from the beginning when the project developed, meaning that a strong partnership with corporates, with government and association actually help us to develop our ICT-based curriculum as well as to understand the demands in the market. The job linkage support also includes mentorship. That means out of partnership with corporates, more than 90 ICT firms, they actually provide mentorship support to youth to understand and give tips to get into the job markets. As well as the implementing partner of Skill to Succeed program provide organized job fair where the youth and the employers took part in interview process, and the youth alumni gatherings where the youth and the employers share their experiences in the job market. In that way, Skill to Succeed project aims to provide decent employment at 60% minimum out of 13,500 youth. So now Jerusalem will let us tell us about the importance of gender analysis in this project.
So as Atik has mentioned, we have been implementing the Skills to Succeed program for a bit, and we noticed that there were employment gaps for women after they finished the program. Compared to men in the program, they had lower rates of employment. So our team started a journey to focus on understanding and, importantly, addressing gender-based barriers that were disproportionately affecting female S2S youth. We conducted a gender analysis as part of a larger research study to identify gender-based barriers and opportunities to young women and men participating in S2S as they relate to their employment outcomes, and test out approaches and interventions to boost employment for women. This gender analysis is conducted as part of a larger randomized control trial that our colleague and principal investigator, Dr. Nathan Fiala, will talk about next. But this study is being done through funding from individual donors and JPAL and IPA. And our primary research question is to measure impact of the Skills to Succeed program as a whole on employment outcomes for youth, and more importantly, to see if we can boost employment outcomes for young women after they participate in our program. So how did we conduct the gender analysis to help us design these gender interventions that we're testing out? We did this by first conducting an extensive literature review, and then conducted data from key informant interviews and focus group discussions with individuals from the ICT BPO sector, government officials, ICT skills experts, implementing staff, employed and unemployed female and male youth, and parents. After data analysis, we hosted a number of validation workshops to ensure that the study results represented the views of participants, and created and then to create and prioritize recommendations from the study that we can act on. So in the gender analysis, it provided us a lot of insight into the extensive gender-based barriers that youth face throughout their employment pathway. We've mapped out some of these results using the socio-ecological framework. At the individual level, we found that youth lacked access to technology. For some, this was the first time they were taking computer classes and did not have access to devices in their home, so they couldn't practice new skills they were learning. Because youth were entering a very technical sector, they were competing with other youth who had a much higher level of education than they did. This meant that they would not be as attractive to employers as others in the marketplace. They also faced different challenges due to cost of transportation to and from jobs. This meant that youth preferred looking for jobs closer to where they lived, limiting the number of opportunities they could apply for. At the family level, they had restricted mobility due to the fear and reality of harassment and safety concerns for young women. For the ICT BPO sector specifically, which is where our youth are employed in, a lot of jobs are US and European-based companies, which meant that working hours can often be at night. And for young women who take on these shifts, there were backlash and community gossips when neighbors or people in their neighborhood would see them coming and going from their homes at odd times. Young women also faced challenges with gender norms related to marriage. Most are expected to stop working and take care of their household once they get married, forcing them to leave the workplace. This, on the other hand, was also seen on the employer side. Some employers didn't want to hire young women because they expected them to quit after they got married or when they have children. And lastly, as I mentioned earlier, most of the jobs in this sector are at night, introducing a variety of concerns and challenges for young women. Now we are going to briefly talk about the actual interventions that we've been implementing to address some of these challenges that we found.
So keeping in all the barriers that we found through the gender analysis, we actually focused on changing the parental attitudes towards breaking these barriers for the female. So what we did actually, we developed 3 gender-based interventions. One is parenting session, another one is theater for development, and another one is role model session. In the parenting sessions, it includes 5 sessions, and the main focus is to increase parents' knowledge and awareness of gender norms and the division of labor and gender-based discrimination. It is basically in these sessions, we try to make parents aware about the non-traditional roles of women in our society and how it helps to boost up employment sector, as well as how it helps to empower female graduated youth. In the Theater for Development, we showed parents a drama where actually parents see that how a woman overcome all the barriers and become a role model. So the main thing is that parents' awareness of gender-based barriers and how succeed a woman in ICT BPO employment opportunities. This is the main focus of Theater for Development. And it followed by a dialogue session among the parents and the female youth. And the finally is role model session. It is like a seeing is believing things that the role model uh, working in ICT sectors, they come into the parenting sessions in front of parents and tell them how they actually overcome the challenge and get a position in ICT firms. So all these interventions actually focus to try to change the attitudes of parents, as well as to encourage female youth to enter into the job ICT firms. So finally, what we see that we have success during this COVID time, as well as we face some of the challenges. Success means that we try to do these gender interventions uh, in line with the situation adverse impact of COVID, meaning that we reduce the number of parents in the session to maintain the social distance, as well as we actually planned originally that we will organize 3 events to complete these gender interventions, but we actually organize 1 event and do not minimize the risk of participation, because we could not very much sure about that parents will participate in all the interventions. So in that way, actually, we try to minimize the risk of participation during this COVID time. Another one is that interactive sessions. Mainly the parenting session includes the quiz, includes the role play, includes uh, fun, games, and the daily chart, so that parents actually engage all the time with interactive sessions. They do not only listen to us or only comments about what they learn. And finally, we also find some of the challenge that we need to highlight as well. We also feel that parental engagement, when we review the sessions, in the sessions, when we get comments from the parents, we also understand that it requires longer period of engagement with the parents to boost up female youth employment at their family level. Another challenges that we find that when we do the theater for development, that is the community theater in front of female parents and their female youth, we see that sometimes in the dialogue session, female youth actually feel hesitate or do not feel comfortable to participate in the dialogue sessions. And finally, the challenge is lower rates of participation by the male parents because heavily engaged due to their livelihood. So these are our success and challenges throughout the gender intervention. Jerusalem, next slide. So what we will do, because the study is still going on, and we are,
Sorry,
we will get.
I might just give you a 1 minute warning then to wrap
Yeah,
up. So that we can
thank you.
move on. Thank you.
So, and this is the last slide, I believe. So this is the findings of this gender study. Actually, we will try to gather the evidence that what in the skills development sector, what works and what does not work in more specific way, and how to scale up through our recommendation, and inform policymakers about the gender programming. That means whenever we develop a skills development program, we should have a specific gender intervention so that the female youth can participate in the employment sector perfectly. And finally, our plan is to disseminate our findings with all local and policy level, with Ministry of Education, Ministry of Labor and Employment, INGO, UN, NGOs, and research organizations, so that they can also develop their program in that way that ultimately help female youth employment in Bangladesh. And thank you on behalf of Skill to Succeed project in Bangladesh, to everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, both to Atik and to Jerusalem, for that great presentation. Let's move then quickly on to a presentation from Nathan Fiala who's going to be continuing the focus on the youth employment, and it's a evaluation of the Skill to Succeed program. So Nathan, hand over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here. I will very quickly walk through the randomized controlled trial that we're designing, or that we designed and are running for the program that we just saw presented to us. So we're implementing this program in cooperation with a number of local partners, including Innovations for Poverty Action. The research team includes myself, Mayor, who's a PhD student from Princeton, and then many of the Skills to Succeed and Save the Children team as well. So as I said, we're conducting a randomized controlled trial. Our original goal was to get 3,500 youths involved in the study in 2 different groups. So these are 2 cohorts that are being done as part of the Skills to Succeed program, cohorts 9 and 10. And in just a second, I'll show you how we actually beat that number, which is great news. The randomization was done at an individual level after we identified youth who were potentially interested in the program. And I shouldn't say we, the research team, did not do this. This was our partners who went out and found youth that had expressed interest in participating. And so we then randomized which youth would be participating in the program and which would be used as a comparison group, so in the control arm. We also did a cross-randomization with this gender intervention that we just heard of. And what's unfortunate is that what's great is that we have a relatively large scale, individual level randomization. That's really good news for all the researchers who are interested in these things. Unfortunately, though, we can't individually randomize youth to receive the gender intervention because the intervention is being done through the clubs itself. And so we had to randomize at the club level, but still we're going to be, I think, well designed to measure the main outcomes that we're interested in. And so our different treatments here are youth that receive the standard Skills to Succeed interventions, youth that receive the Skills to Succeed and our gender interventions, and then those that don't receive anything, and that's our comparison group. So this is kind of repeating a little bit of what Jerusalem already talked about, but some of our outcomes of interest, what is participation in S2S have on youth employment outcomes, and how does it particularly empower and boost employment outcomes for young girls? For specifically thinking through some of the gender stuff that we're interested in, are parents going to permit young women to work more? Will we see more young women working? Can they make more decisions on their own employment? Will they continue working even after marriage? And will these women get access to technology and continue their education in the future? So these are all kind of things that we're interested in trying to understand. Here's our final sample, split up by the two cohorts. In cohort 9, we were able to recruit 1,477 youth and then randomize them into either the normal program, the program with the gender component, or a control group. And you'll notice that these numbers are kind of all over the place. Well, our original goal was to get 675, 675, and I think 500. We didn't quite meet those goals in our cohort 9 recruitment. And we were quite worried about what was going to be going on because cohort 10 started recruitment at around the time that COVID was happening. We have a lot of issues and problems with that, but the team did an incredible job and really rescued this design. I think they recruited 2,300 people and allow us to have a fairly large control group. What this means is that we've got a good sample size here, and we should be well designed and well powered to identify some of our main outcomes of interest. We conducted a baseline survey with the youth. So anybody who expressed interest, so all of these 3,779 youth that expressed interest in the program filled out a baseline survey conducted by Innovations for Poverty Action. We had a consent form. We had some background information on demographics and education, some employment history, self-efficacy questions, and then an employability assessment tool. Basically just getting a baseline idea of what their feelings about work and some of their abilities to do work. Here's just a really quick summary of some of the results. Now, we saw before that the goal is to get 30% of women into these types of training programs. We've actually got about 40% of our group here as women. This is to show that those that are in our treatment group are well balanced with those that are in our control group. So especially with a sample size this large, it's not too surprising that we'll have that. What's interesting is that we have a group here that is very young, just under 19 years old, and that's in big part by design for the program. So our next steps, we received some funding to do a very quick follow-up with our cohort 9. We'll actually be doing what we're calling a midline data collection in September, October this year. But that will be only a few months after they finished all the programming with Save the Children. We're going to use this to really understand what's going on in the short run and maybe help to understand a little bit about what kind of mechanisms might be happening and basically get us well designed so that when we do our longer term follow-up on both cohorts 9 and 10, which we're planning for more mid of next year, so that we can see what are some of the longer run outcomes for participants in this type of program. And so for the short term, some of the things we're interested in, what are the attitudes of youth towards work? What's the effect of COVID on their working situation? And what's some of the short-term employment outcomes that can happen after a program like this? And then in the longer term, we want to, again, understand the employment outcomes and, whether and how this had positive effects for women. So we saw this photo. You might notice that, like many of you, I can tell, my hair's gotten a lot longer since the COVID lockdowns. I will say I've lost a bunch of weight since then too. So, but thanks a lot to this team. It's been a really great time working with y'all.
Great. I'm glad that we're not all being asked to present before and after pictures from COVID, because that could be a little scary, but looking good for you, Nathan. So well done. Okay, we'll move on now. And thank you, Nathan. You also got us back on time with our agenda too. So thanks for your very speedy run through there. So we're going to move to Chris Woodruff and Atanu Rabani for the next presentation on COVID-19 and the lives of female workers in the ready-made garment sector.
Great, thanks a lot. So thanks everybody for joining us. Atanu is here. He'll be happy to answer any questions that come up during the presentation. I should say this is also joint work with Hanu Ukat, who's at the World Bank. We're going to talk about. I'm going to talk about some data collection that we've done with a sample of garment sector workers over the last year plus, and kind of think about what's the impact of the COVID crisis on those workers. We then have an intervention that's in process now on telephone-based counseling for workers to help release stress, and I'll show you through the data what the motivation for that is. The story is going to be basically that the COVID crisis caused a very short, sharp shock to income of the workers in our sample. Incomes recovered quite rapidly. The initial shock was gender neutral. However, even though incomes recovered, we think there's a fair amount of uncertainty that's been created and background stress that's been created, and that background stress and uncertainty is not gender neutral. And so we see sort of women taking on more of the burden of the effect of COVID across time, and that's, I think, what the story that the data will show us. So I don't need to say too much about this to this audience, but the garment sector in Bangladesh is enormous. It employs about 4 million workers, roughly 2/3 of them women, and we've carried out 5 rounds of surveys beginning right after the COVID shock, and basically being quarterly since, with the most recent one conducted in the spring just before Eid, and a 6th round in the field as we speak. The sampling frame, I won't go through this, but in detail. But basically, we have 2,100 respondents from the survey. We're going to focus here mainly on about 1,200 non-managers who were employed in the RMG sector at the beginning of February 2020. So our sample comes from a series of past projects. They're all workers who worked in the garment sector, but at the time that we contacted them at the beginning of the COVID crisis, they weren't all necessarily still working in the garment sector. I'm going to focus here mainly on the ones who are still working in the garment sector. So a few quick, just sort of the description of what happened. First of all, on income, salaries from the garment sector. As I said before, we see a short, sharp shock that in April of last year, incomes fell roughly in half. They recover not entirely, but they recover mostly fairly quickly after that. We get into a period where we have bonuses and so forth that are making total payments somewhat higher than the normal monthly payments, but the normal monthly salaries recover not entirely back to the February level, but recover somewhat. Same thing happens with household income, and for the most part, these are households where this is the primary source of income in the household. So we see in the same thing, the household income falls in April and then recovers fairly quickly after that. Notice the bottom quartile here, and the bottom part of the distribution in particular takes quite a lot longer to recover. So there are people who sort of, at the margins who fall off somewhat more. Food consumption falls a little bit in April. I'll say more about this in detail in a second. Not surprisingly, there's a lot of smoothing. This ends up coming out of savings and out of transfers to other family members, and so overall food consumption drops, but stays much more stable, not surprisingly, than income. A couple of things to note on food consumption, though. First, the left-hand graph here shows the percentage of households who tell us they cut back on consumption of a particular type of food or particular type of food group. And what we see is, much higher cutback on protein, meats and fish and so forth, much less on staples. So there was a shift in the household food consumption towards grains and staples and away from proteins, especially early over the first 4 or 5 months after the COVID hit. What's sort of more striking is, as I said, in the introduction, this shock drop in food consumption was initially gender neutral, where we see both males and females for both staples and proteins cutting back consumption equally. As we go forward, and particularly in September and December in the latter half of 2020, it's women who cut back on consumption much more than men, and that's especially the case in proteins and in proteins. And this is true even among the women who continue to work in the garment sector. So even among women who are women and men who are working the 6-day shifts in the garment sector, women are the ones who are reducing consumption in the household. Then we see the third finding in this is that anxiety levels build up over the crisis. So this is the share of respondents report moderate levels of stress according to GAD-7. And what we see is a sharp increase in that share in the fall, in the autumn of 2020 and into 2021, although it drops a bit coming into 2021, but we see a sharp increase in that. And so the last thing I want to look at is what are the covariates with that are associated with these higher levels of stress. The first thing to point out is that stress levels are higher for women than for men. They're highest in households that tell us they have difficulty getting enough food to feed everyone in the household. They're highest for households that report illness in the household. And then there are, for women who have another household member employed or who are married, stress levels are generally somewhat lower. For men who have another household member employed, which usually means their spouse is employed, stress levels are somewhat higher. And similarly for married males. We then, and this is not yet from our intervention, but just from a question that asks whether workers have used counseling services or taken advantage of counseling services over the past 3 months in round 5, we see that those who've used counseling services report somewhat lower levels of stress. This is promising for an intervention that we're now carrying out, which is working with an NGO, Manarbandhu, to provide telephone-based counseling services for workers. And as I said, we're in the field now with the final round of surveys, and we hope to have results on the intervention itself, as opposed to just sort of correlates with stress levels soon. So takeaway, we see this short, sharp drop in April, in particular in April of last year. Income returns close to normal, but stress levels increase across time. And these telephone-based counseling services show some promise, at least preliminarily, at least the idea of counseling shows some promise in reducing stress levels. And we've got further survey work to do in this area. So I'll stop there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we're really excited to hear how this, the telephone-based counseling goes. So now we'll hand it over to Wahid Alam, who's going to provide some reflections just from a policy perspective on this topic, and we can go into Q&A from there.
Hello, can you hear me?
Can
you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks.
And can I remind everyone else to please mute their lines?
Thank you, Radha, for giving me the floor, and good evening and good morning to everybody. First, I want to express my appreciation to all the presenters to sharing their research design and insight from their research. I think that it is a quite illuminating research design and research findings that you have gathered so far. I hope that this research would contribute to reduce gender discriminations, addressing deficiencies in participation of women and youth in job market, their skill enhancement in the context of catastrophic pandemic. We all know that COVID has become a catastrophe across the world, and it has become one of the a major catastrophe in modern civilization. It has devastated every continent, every country, in the societies across the world. And we know that because of this COVID pandemic, supply chain has been severely disrupted, economy slowed down, people lost their jobs in many sectors, and above all, health of people become in stake. Bangladesh has not been exception from all this unsavory impact of COVID. Although Bangladesh set a target to achieve 8.5% GDP growth by the end of 2025, as it enshrined is in its current 5-year plan. But in 2019 and 20, the country achieved 5.2% GDP growth against the targeted 8.2%. Because of COVID-induced closures and disruption in global supply chain. Although Bangladesh has become integrated through in the global supply chain through its garment sector, the COVID has inflicted a major blow in this sector because of this pandemic. And you know that garment sector is one of the major engine of our economy, and as the country earn about 80% of export earning from this sector. When the COVID inflicted the Western Hemisphere, the major band canceled their orders. In such a context, export earning from garments export declined to 27.9 billion in 2020 from earlier years 34 billion. Resultantly, many factories closed down and started laying off its workers. As the garments is predominantly comprised of female workers, the closure factories at the very beginning, at the same time, laying off of workers put some severe blow to female workers. But the Bangladesh government has come up with some stimulus package and injected around 9,000 crore taka to pay to factories so that they can pay their pay salaries to their workers. Despite that, some factories closed down and some workers lost their job. Another issue is that because of COVID, roles of female workers has largely changed, because we know that female are the major caregivers in their families and in their vicinities. So when the COVID started infecting people, they fall into some sort of anxiety, and that created some another blow to their health at the same time in the sector and the global supply chain. But I feel that this RCT-based research design at the center findings would create evidence to influence policies to retain jobs, improve workers' skills, and keep workers secure to stand against the brunt of the pandemic. However, to me, that there are some areas where future exploration could be extended. According to many studies, still there is a gender stereotype towards female workers. Many factories believe that women are quite incapable to assume the role of supervisors. They lack the managerial skill and the toughness to increase production and maintain productivity. So that I feel that maybe some sort of studies can be taken that female can also assume, female workers can assume manager role, and they can maintain productivity and and increase production. Another issue that is that after the Rana Plaza disaster, the salaries of workers in Bangladesh has increased to some extent and considerably, I should say. This has created some sort of because of that, factories impose some sort of targets on production target on workers. Earlier, maybe say they had to produce 2 shares, and now they have to produce 4 shares. Because of this extra pressure, it created somewhat mental agony on workers, especially the female workers, because they are the forefront workers to produce the garments products. So I feel that, and there are a lot of studies that shows that because of this, maybe because of this pressure, over the last few years, participation of female workers in our garment sectors declined considerably. Earlier it was 80%, now it has become to 60%. So I feel that these are areas where further exploration can be undertaken and some evidence-based findings can be generated so that we can contribute to the retention of female workers, at the same time increment of their skills. Now I come to the skill employment aspect of the of female workers and youth. And you know that in Bangladesh, the average employment rate in Bangladesh is around 4.2%. Understandably, this would be somewhat higher among the females because they are the most disadvantaged section in the society. According to ILO, Bangladesh labor force is growing at a rate of 2.2%, as Asad Bhai earlier mentioned, which is implied that 1.8 million new entities are entering into our job market. And through our skill development agencies run by government and private sector, we can accommodate provide training to around 1.4 million youths, so that around 0.4 million people are out of the purview of skill development. Another issue is that as Asad Bhai also mentioned that fourth industrial revolution is creating some sort of changing scenario in our job market and skill requirements. And ATO has conducted studies which where it has identified 11 sectors where skills would be redundant, and there would be 5 sectors where more employment or skills would be required. So under this context, over the years, ITO has undertaken some innovative skill development intervention to cater to the needs of the workers, so that they can accommodate themselves with the changing realities of the COVID, at the same time fourth industrial revolutions. At the same time, another issue is that ITO project has a one platform, e-commerce platform, which is called the shop, through which it's connect SMEs to market their products, at the same time to facilitate them to get finance to enhance or regenerate their intervention entrepreneurship. So what is necessary is to conduct impact evaluation also initiative to learn how effective these initiatives are, so that there would be ample evidence and evidence-based research findings by which much support can be garnered for policy intervention to save jobs and develop skills of women youth so that they can withstand against the adverse effect of COVID. In Bangladesh, we have some sort of deficiency in evidence-based research, at the same time evidence-based policy making. So I feel that the research would to address this gap and help the stakeholders and policymakers to take care of some evidence-based policies and interventions and programs. Another issue is that we should generate a concerted effort to identify impactful initiatives through our intervention and the research, because there might be some other areas where we can reach wider population or wider a segment of the wider segment of communities, especially the marginalized people and youth. And there we can take some research and produce some evidence so that they can be used for evidence-based policy making. At the same time, we have to assemble stakeholders in one platform so that we would be able to voice raise our concern, at the same time communicate our research findings to make some impact, considerable impact. Finally, I believe that policymakers and other stakeholders that participants in the work in this webinar should take cognizance of this research design, at the same time research findings, and take some initiative from their board so that the jobs of female workers, women, at the same time your skills would be retained, and at the same time their skills would be improved further, and thus we could contribute to their well-being. Thank you all for your listening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wahid, for that great summary and perspectives. We'll open up the floor for questions now. I've seen a few people have started posting some questions in the chat. Please do feel free to also raise your hand if there are additional questions. I think just as a recap, because we've heard a lot, we've, we're looking for, we'd love to hear feedback. Some of the key themes that we're focused on here is we heard from Ashley around the job search, job search platforms and the attempts to make that more frictionless. We've heard presentations about skills building and some gender-specific interventions to increase parents' engagement and commitment to skills building for daughters, as well as overall just outcomes for young women through the Skills to Succeed program. And then some of the very specific impacts that we heard about from Chris's presentation around income shocks, food security, and then also some of the testing that they're now going to be pursuing in terms of mental health support. So please do, if there are questions that you have or feedback that you'd like to give, it would be great to hear from you in our last 10 minutes. In the meantime, maybe we can draw on some of the questions that are in the chat. So maybe that last question from Sajida Amin for Chris and Atanu. If you can see, do you see that question? Not sure if you want to be able to, can you respond to that? I'll read
Oh,
it
no,
out.
you go for it.
Yeah. Oh, okay, great. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Great.
Sadapa, thanks so much for the question. So I think I'll have two sets of answer to your question. So one is we have shown some covariates. For example, if there's uncertainty regarding feeding the household, or if there's somebody is sick in the household, those are typically associated with higher stress level. So even if income and consumption consumption was smooth during the time, but income kind of came back to the pre-COVID level. These are the some of the underlying factors that remained and contributed to the higher stress level. The second set of, I think there's an uncertainty regarding employment as well. So for example, even during the first quarter or first 2 quarters, when there was actually a drop in income, the stress level remained somewhat similar or same, or it didn't go up as much as it did later on. I think initially there were a lot of government support, so there was much less concern regarding losing job. But as time kind of passed by, there are kind of lot more uncertainty regarding losing jobs or laying off. So I think that may also contribute to the kind of increasing stress, but that was also kind of came down in recent time. We are collecting data right now in 6th round. I think this will be, since we are going through a pretty similar situation, higher vulnerability and risk and uncertainty. I think if our hypothesis is true, we should see that the stress level spiking up again. But maybe in the next roundtable, we will be able to share those data. So over to you. Either Chris want to add something or no?
Nope, just what I would have said.
If you don't mind, I can jump in and answer a question that was asked in the chat a little bit earlier. So Jada, I responded directly to you, but or no, sorry, that's my mistake. Yeah, no, you also asked a question to me as well. So the question that I was asked was the percentage of married in our sample is very low, and so the answer is yes, that's both men and women combined. However, it is fairly low for both men and women in our sample, and that has everything to do with how family constraints exist in Bangladesh and make it difficult for people to attend these types of trainings, especially for women. So I think the family pressure is something that the gender intervention is meant to also try to overcome and to keep women who are married, who will eventually be married, able to continue working, which is something that is often not common. So it's actually very specific to the design of the program as to why we see a fairly low marriage rate.
Terrific. Thanks, Nathan. Okay, any other questions?
Rada, I see that Mohammed has his hand raised.
Great.
Thanks
for flagging that. Mohammed, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure. Rada, I am very pleased to see all the presentation present here for the sector of especially sector of Bangladesh. I have no question, but I have just feedback to everybody. Wonderful presentations, and one thing is that Bangladesh government is really keen to develop the skill sector. Bangladesh government established NSDA, National Skill Development Authority, also under the Prime Minister, and they are now keen to goes to the not only urban area, they are going to keen to the rural area. And yesterday I have joined a session of the Director of Technical Education, and they are now trying to give them the skill in school-based program. So it is a great, it would be great for the Bangladesh skill, and as well what the presented is good to the government. It will be helpful the skill for the Bangladesh, especially young women in Bangladesh. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much for that comment. Any other questions or comments from the audience? And amongst our panelists as well. Ah, okay, here we go. It's a question from Ashley in the chat for Chris and Atanu.
Maybe just to jump in is just to provide more context. I'm just wondering, given the restrictions that were imposed earlier this year and just like the ongoing uncertainty that some of the short-term coping mechanisms might be weakened or already used up, such as savings. So I'm just wondering what you're expecting to see in your subsequent surveys, given that the pandemic isn't over and it's going to be ongoing.
That's a very I think a good line of interesting line of inquiry. We have not looked at the network in the data yet. Maybe that's something, whatever we have, especially the savings and social support system in our data set. I think given that the income level of the household kind of came back to the kind of pre-COVID level, the social support system in terms of kind of economic support will probably are playing a much smaller role. One thing I did not mention in the context of the previous question is the school closure and its role. I think the health, given the depth and breadth of the pandemic and infection has gone up, the social support system and its role may play a bigger role in terms of healthcare access and related services. But this is something we may want to explore further in the next slide, in the next set of data analysis. So.
Okay. Chris, did you want to come in with anything on that?
No, I think that's it's a good. We have somewhat limited data on savings, but I think that we do see effects on. We did see some initial effects on transfers, especially last spring in both directions, and it's a good point that this I think the one point I would have added earlier to the sort of growing levels of stress generally is I think at least I feel this myself, that stress is growing across time. It's just sort of a strange situation. The longer this goes on, the more the anxiety kind of builds up slowly across time, and it is partly just stress itself, and it's partly what you're talking about, Ashley, that the coping mechanisms you have are kind of being exhausted as you go out, and we'll see. I think we will see effects of that. As Atana said earlier, we might expect to see a spike again in stress levels as we see the next round of data.
Great. Any final comments before we close? I'd love to invite Wahid. Any final comments from you before we close?
No, Radha, I don't have any comments.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, then we're at time. So I want to really thank all of the presenters today and our partners at A2I as well for really bringing all of this together. We're very excited to see what has already emerged from the findings, but also just keeping track of what's continuing to emerge, because this is such an important conversation, one that we all care about in terms of informing future policy and programming. We will, as this felt like a little bit of a taster of things to come. So as the findings continue to emerge, we'll have follow-on webinars like this so that we can keep in touch and learn what is emerging from these studies. Yeah, I'm really grateful to all of you, all of the presenters for giving their time, and all of you that joined to listen in. please do watch this space. As has been mentioned in the chat, we'll post all of the recording of this will go out to all registered participants. So even those who are not able to attend, and the presentations will be posted online. And we'll certainly be, as the findings start coming through, we'll also plan and disseminate dates for the next events. So thank you so much to all of you, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.